You enter the Vatican to preserve history, and slowly realize your real job is deciding when the world is allowed to face it. You begin as a young archivist, drawn by scholarship, ritual, and the promise of proximity to one of the oldest institutions on Earth. But as you rise deeper into the Vatican's archival system, access turns into authority, authority turns into silence, and silence turns into complicity. By the time sealed files begin passing through your hands, you no longer believe history is simply hidden or revealed. You understand something colder. It is staged, sequenced, authenticated, delayed, and survived. At first, the gravity of the collection is an honor, a weight you carry with a sense of sacred duty. You walk through corridors lined with the thoughts of dead kings and forgotten popes, imagining yourself as the bridge between the past and the present. But the institution does not need a bridge, it needs a vault. It requires someone who can look at a devastating truth and see only a classification problem. You begin to see that the archives are not a library of what happened, but a fortress of what remains after the flames and the filters have done their work. The change in you is not sudden. It happens in the quiet hours between retrieval and storage, when you realize that certain letters should never be seen by contemporary eyes because the present is too fragile for them. You stop seeing your work as an intellectual pursuit and start seeing it as a form of maintenance, keeping the engine of the world running by ensuring certain parts are never examined too closely. Before dawn, you surrender your phone. Not because anyone asked twice, because after the first week, you stop needing to be told. The locker shuts with a small metal click, and the sound feels larger than it should in the morning stillness. Outside, Rome is still gray, draped in the mist of the Tiber and the residual noise of the night. Inside, the corridors are already awake in the quiet way old institutions wake. No noise, just movement. Shoes on stone, a door opening somewhere beyond view, a lamp already on in a room that has no windows. You straighten your jacket, sign your name in the heavy ledger, and accept the key. It is not a ceremonial key. It is plain, cold, heavier than it looks, and attached to a tag whose handwriting is older than your confidence. This is the first thing you learn about the Vatican archive. Nothing announces its importance. Not the boxes, not the rooms, not the men who decide who may enter them, and certainly not the paper itself, which is often brittle and unassuming until you read the signatures. You follow the path carved by centuries of your predecessors, walking past rows of unmarked boxes that contain the secrets of dynasties. The air here is different, filtered and pressurized, holding the scent of old vellum and beeswax. You feel the weight of the masonry above you, tons of Vatican stone that serve as both a shield and a lid. Every step you take away from the light of the entrance is a step away from the modern world and its obsession with immediate transparency. Here, time is measured not by clocks, but by the slow degradation of ink and the endurance of secrets. You are no longer an individual with a phone and a presence on the internet. You are a ghost in the machine of history, a temporary occupant of a permanent space, bound by a silence that you have already begun to welcome as a form of armor against the chaos of the city outside. The corridors stretch for miles, a labyrinth of shelving that holds the collective memory of Western civilization, yet it feels claustrophobic. You realize that the sheer volume of information is its own kind of concealment. To find one truth, you must navigate a sea of mundane administrative records, tax receipts from the Renaissance, and diplomatic complaints from the Middle Ages. The brilliance of the system lies in its boredom. Most people would give up long before finding the document that changes everything. But you are trained to be patient. You are trained to look past the dust and see the patterns. You begin to notice how certain shelves are more polished than others, how certain boxes are moved with a reverence that borders on fear. You are part of a lineage of keepers who understand that the greatest power is not in knowing the secret, but in knowing where the secret is kept and who is looking for it. The masonry above you is not just stone, it is the physical manifestation of the Church's resolve to outlast the curiosity of the masses. You are the living component of that resolve, a human filter through which the past must pass before it is allowed to touch the present. This is not a job for the curious, it is a job for the disciplined, for those who can live in the shadow of giants without feeling the need to shout their names to the world. You are the silent witness to the centuries. You came here because you thought history lived in revelation, buried confessions, secret letters, forgotten decrees, the stuff of documentaries and late-night speculation. Then the first archivist who trains you places a bundle of correspondence on the table, rests 2 fingers on the top page, and says, almost kindly, "What survives is rarely what people meant to reveal. It is what no one succeeded in destroying." That is your real beginning. Not wonder, but discipline. The documents before you are the remnants of battles fought long ago, where the winners dictated what stayed and the losers tried to burn what they could. You realize that a gap in the record is just as informative as a full folder, provided you know who had the motive to create the vacuum. The archive is a collection of residues, the ash and bone of thousands of administrative processes. Your mentor watches you as you examine the jagged edges of a torn page, looking for the telltale signs of intentional excision. You learn to listen to the silence in the papers. If a powerful man's correspondence suddenly goes quiet for a year, you look for the administrative shadows in the surrounding files. You look for the missing payments, the redirected couriers, the sudden change in handwriting of a secretary. You are learning the language of the void. It is a terrifying realization that history is not a solid ground, but a series of islands in a dark ocean of what has been lost or hidden. You start to see the hand of the censor in every century. It is not always a violent act. Often it is a gentle omission, a decision to let a document rot in a damp corner rather than bringing it to the light. You begin to understand that your role is not to find the truth, but to manage the absence of it. You are the curator of the missing, the one who knows exactly what is not there and why it must remain that way. The change in you is not sudden. It happens in the quiet hours between retrieval and storage, when you realize that certain letters should never be seen by contemporary eyes because the present is too fragile for them. You stop seeing your work as an intellectual pursuit and start seeing it as a form of maintenance, keeping the engine of the world running by ensuring certain parts are never examined too closely. This is the first mask you wear. It is the mask of the scholar guardian, someone who believes that history is a flame that must be hooded to keep it from burning the house down. You think you are protecting the people from the truth, but you are really protecting the institution from the consequences of its own long and heavy shadow. You find yourself holding a letter from a 16th century cardinal that could dismantle a modern dogma, and instead of feeling the rush of discovery, you feel a cold wave of responsibility. You look at the ink, still dark after 500 years, and you realize that if you release this, you are not just sharing a fact, you are triggering a collapse. You begin to justify the silence. You tell yourself that the world is not ready, that the faith of millions is more important than the accuracy of a single record. You become the judge of what is useful history and what is dangerous history. The mask fits more comfortably every day. You no longer see the bars on the windows as a prison, but as a necessary boundary. You are the one who decides which ghosts are allowed to speak and which must remain in the stone. Your colleagues nod to you in the halls, a silent recognition of the shared burden. We are not historians, their eyes say. We are the architects of the acceptable past. We ensure the narrative remains coherent, even if the reality was chaotic and cruel. By the time sealed files begin passing through your hands, you no longer believe history is simply hidden or revealed. You understand something colder. It is staged, sequenced, authenticated, delayed, and survived. You see the process of declassification not as an act of transparency, but as a strategic release of pressure. You learn how to leak the small truths to distract from the larger ones. You observe how the institution prepares the public for a revelation decades in advance, softening the blow until the truth no longer has the power to wound. This is the final stage of your transformation. You are no longer the young archivist who wanted to touch the past. You are the gatekeeper who ensures the past never touches the present in a way that matters. You sit in your windowless room, surrounded by the thoughts of the dead, and you realize that you have become part of the masonry. You are as permanent and as silent as the stone walls. The files you handle today will be the secrets of the next century, and you are already deciding how they will be framed. You are the one who writes the notes that will guide the next generation of guardians. You tell them what to protect and what to ignore.